August 1945. A Berlin stairwell smells like wet cement and stale smoke. Marta Hillers presses her ink-stained thumb against the door latch and whispers to her neighbor, "If they come, don't scream. No hurry now. They've won." Another woman mutters, "Peace," they said. The war has ended. The hunger hasn't. The soldiers are different, but the fear is the same. The daily ration is less than 1,000 calories. People work all day on what a child should eat for breakfast. Cigarettes are worth more than money. Fat is currency. Bread is power. In the rubble chains, women pass bricks hand to hand. Pick, stack, scrape mortar, pass again. 10 salvaged bricks mean a wall you won't have to steal. A good chain can move 1,000 bricks in an hour if nobody's knee gives out, if the water comes on time, if the old man gets back up. What no one knows yet, within 3 years American planes will drop candy over this same city. Children will count engines at the fence like counting coins. The starving will become the rescued. The enemy will become the lifeline. Peace didn't save Berlin. Airlift did. A Russian patrol walks up the street. They won, so they don't rush anymore. Marta stands in the stairwell with the other women and does the math. Do you hide? Do you run? Do you open the door and try to talk your way through it? She hates herself for thinking this way, but it keeps her alive. When the soldiers leave, the house breathes again. The women step outside carefully. Most of the men left in this building are either too old to fight or too young to remember when things were different. The strongest hands now belong to women, to thin teenagers, to a father who used to run a lathe and now digs rubble with a shovel. For Marta, being a rubble woman means standing in a chain. Someone blows a whistle and the line starts moving. Pick, pass, stack, scrape the old mortar off, pass again. You save every brick you can because the bricks you save are the only bricks you can use. In July, down on Jägerstrasse, a wall shifts and the whistle screams. Everyone freezes. Dust hangs in the air. Then the forewoman, hair tied back, hands like leather, waves them forward again. Someone jokes, they should pay us in bread, 1 slice per 100 bricks. But nobody laughs much. A bombed building isn't garbage. It's a supply depot. You hit the mortar, not the brick face, or it cracks and you've lost it. You scrape the old mortar with the blunt end of your hammer. 10 stacks make a pallet. A pallet can become a room. The city rebuilds itself from its own wreckage because there's nothing else to build with. 20 people in a tight chain can move 1,000 bricks in an hour. If the chain holds. If the stacks are close enough. If water and food show up. The chain stops when someone's knee buckles, or when the old man sits down and takes too long to stand. One evening in August, a car slows near the border between the British and American zones at Kaiserplatz. Leo Borchardt sits in the back seat. He's a conductor, thin, intense, loved by musicians trying to rehearse in a city that can barely breathe. He's been visiting a British officer who wanted to hear music that reminded him of home. Now it's dark. The lights are bad. The driver approaches a checkpoint. A hand goes up. Stop or keep going. The driver reads it wrong. The gunshots come so fast the street jerks. Borchardt is dead before anyone realizes it was a mistake. The next day, everyone understands what it means. The war ended, but the danger didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Now you can die because you crossed an invisible line on a street that looks like every other street. The city is carved up between armies, and if you don't know whose zone you're in, you can get shot for guessing wrong. The story spreads fast. After the funeral, they put up better signs, brighter paint, clearer markers. But signs don't bring anyone back. Marta hears about Borchardt and writes that night, "We are all waiting for someone else to decide who we are." She does her calculations again. The door stays locked at night. She keeps a scarf by the bed. A neighbor says, "It will get better soon." It's the most common sentence in Berlin. Another says, "It could be worse." Both sound like prayers from people who aren't sure which God is listening. The weeks pass. Peace is the word on the official papers, but nobody in the stairwell believes it. Staying alive is a full-time job now. But in the background, something new is starting. Different soldiers show up, ones who speak English. New stamps appear on documents. New rules. Who can work, who can teach, who can stand in which line. The shooting stopped, the paperwork started. Victor Klemperer stands in a corridor colder inside the building than on the street outside. The air smells like wet wool and coal dust, the kind that gets into clothes and stays there. People keep their coats on. You can literally see your breath. Deeper inside, a rubber stamp thuds like a slow heartbeat. A denazification questionnaire with over 100 questions in exhausted type. Boxes for affiliations. Boxes for work. Boxes for neighbors to confirm or deny who you actually were. It asks for dates, like a person can be reduced to a calendar. A clerk with a patient face calls his name. Klemperer? Victor sits on a chair that wobbles. The clerk doesn't snarl. He works with forms. Victor holds a pen the way a surgeon holds a scalpel. The right mark will feed him. The wrong mark will close a door he can't open again. He answers truthfully, because truth is simpler, and he's tired. His list includes lectures he can't teach yet, books he wants to finish, the house he hopes to heat someday. The clerk nods when the stamp comes down. "Come back Thursday," he says. On the landing outside, a woman whispers, "Did you get it?" He nods. "For now," he says. She exhales the way soldiers do when a shell lands far away. Millions of these forms go out across the American and British zones. Entire professions, whole towns stacked in folders in offices. A single city office can process hundreds in a week. When everything works, the ink, the lights, the coal for heat. When it doesn't work, the line grows like frost creeping across a window pane, and people stand waiting. Jokes start in the lines. "Everybody gets Fragebogen sooner or later," a man says behind Victor. The clerk hears him and doesn't smile. The stamp falls again. The difference between allowed and not allowed is just the thickness of a sheet of paper. "Stamp or no bread," a woman says flatly, and nobody argues with her, because she's stating a fact. The black market's numbers are clear and immediate. The ration office's numbers are slower, but more permanent. Whether you get to teach or not, whether you can fix your roof, whether you can move, it's all tied to permission from this system. While they wait, the winter of 1946 to 47 arrives, the hunger winter. Adults try to survive on roughly 700 calories. Some manage around 1,000 if they're lucky. The baseline for a normal adult should be double that. 700 calories is a bowl of thin soup, half a loaf of dark bread, and a spoon of margarine spread so thin you could read a newspaper through it. That's the day. It's not enough for a body lifting bricks, pushing carts, or biking around trying to find coal. Wolfgang W. Samuel is a boy with a mother who hides her fear behind a brisk, efficient voice. They've come west from Silesia with a single suitcase that keeps getting lighter. Not because they're removing things, but because clothes become food. On a corner near a train station, they stand in a cluster of people whose eyes are sharp and calculating. This is the black market. Cigarettes are numbers you can move with your fingers. American brands buy more than anything else. A pack of American cigarettes is a multiplier. You trade it for bread, potatoes, a handful of raisins, and each has a price that shifts depending on the weather, depending on rumors, depending on which checkpoint is open this week and which one isn't. Wolfgang has a camera he carried all the way from home, the kind that used to mean weekends and friends and sunlight and everything that feels normal. He looks at it and says to his mother, "If we sell it, we eat." His mother watches him the way parents look at their children when love and fear collide in the same moment. "If we keep it," she says, "we remember." He thinks about his stomach aching, then about that feeling when a photograph appears in a tray like a ghost that decides to stay. Finally, he breathes out, "We'll remember without it." The trade happens quickly. The bread is heavy in the bag and light in his mouth. He decides right then not to cry where anyone can see him. A currency fails when it stops measuring trust. When official prices mean nothing, People choose a unit that actually means something. A cigarette, a can of fat, a bar of soap. These are objects with built-in value, because you can use them even if nobody will trade them for anything else. A cigarette buys calories, not because some government number says it does, but because a cold, hungry person knows exactly what that item is worth in their actual day. You calculate a fair trade with your stomach, and your stomach doesn't lie. Victor learns how to queue at dawn when the ink pads are still wet and the clerks are friendlier. Out at the outskirts, he discovers coal is easier to find if you bike around and ask at the back doors of buildings. The new political words work basically as passwords, opening some offices and closing others when spoken carefully. He writes in his diary that words have weight again. In a city where everything is measured in kilograms, even syllables are heavy. On a grey morning, Wolfgang tries to trade a scarf for a handful of potatoes, and he's told the rate has shifted. Someone says, after the currency reform, speaking about something that hasn't even happened yet, like it's already here. The rumor alone is already moving prices. He walks home chewing on that word, reform, like it's actual food. In the corridors and in the markets, 3 different tallies move at once. Forms distributed by the millions. Ration calories that should be thousands and are not. Cigarettes traded by the pack or box or single units. A city can be conquered by hunger and managed by paper. The bureaucracy works when everything else is falling apart because some systems only need light and ink and bodies that can sit for 8 hours. The denazification machine harvests time and attention. The ration system funnels desperation into order. This is competence, not kindness, and that makes it more powerful. By spring 1947, Victor has a permit that stays valid from one Thursday to the next. Wolfgang has learned to count in completely new units. A loaf as a day of life. A rumor as a reason to leave the line and try somewhere else. The transformation is past its midpoint. The movement is from surviving the day to surviving the actual system itself. On walls and on people's lips, and in those long queues, a sentence keeps appearing. If paper can starve you, maybe money can feed you. Money is about to change, not gradually like a season, but like a thunderclap. Ruth Andreas Friedrich woke to a rumor that became official procedure by morning. The pale light made chalk look impossibly bright, and people moved through the streets carrying envelopes stamped for distribution. At the front of one queue, a clerk counted notes so crisp they felt like leaves after a long winter. 40 Deutschmark, he said, placing them in someone's palm with such seriousness that the hand shook. It's real money, the phrase travelled street to street. It was relief mixed with disbelief. That numb feeling when a fever finally breaks. The Reichsmarks had become history overnight. The black market pivoted instantly. Cigarettes might still be useful tomorrow morning, but by afternoon they were basically an awkward language nobody needed to speak. Ruth walked down a street that was yesterday a lineup of closed shutters. Today it had transformed. A baker's door opened. A woman who looked like everyone's aunt stood in that doorway, chalking prices for loaves that were actually there. A hardware shop that had been closed for weeks clicked its lock open. The owner, when asked, "Later?" shook his head. Now. By evening, windows that were dusty gleamed suddenly bright with goods. The shelves might not be completely full yet, but the day had a before and an after, hours apart. 40 Deutschmarks per person. Later there would be 20 more, but today 40 reset the entire city's heartbeat. Prices were back. That's what money does when it actually works. It gives things names that people can agree on. The black market got thinner, not because people suddenly became better, but because they actually had a choice. The reform gave some people more and some people less. It didn't rebuild apartments or warm up a stove, but when someone said, "I have cigarettes," and then said, "I have money," something had shifted. A father with a scar down his cheek tried to pay with a pack of cigarettes for a doctor's visit. The nurse shook her head. Cigarettes won't do it today. The reform had arrived in sealed envelopes with a staggered exchange system. Old currency was withdrawn, New notes entered, with limits attached to keep hoarders from crushing the market. Shops that had been sitting on goods moved that stock onto shelves because now the measure had returned. Prices were posted because there was a point to posting them. Everyone received that same initial stake, 40 marks. The first conversation you had was more equal than it was a day before. Ruth noticed the woman at the bakery touch that new note before she even counted change, as if checking the texture. She noticed men who used to check their pockets for cigarettes now tapping for notes instead. A fight didn't happen because two men could both buy something they actually needed, and the shop would still have more tomorrow. She wrote it down. The city is lighter. Then someone said a train didn't arrive. Someone else said a road was closed for repair, and you could hear the quotation marks in their voice. Another person said, they can't stop everything. A fourth person responded, they don't have to. They can stop enough. The exact day that money began to actually work, someone cut the routes that let goods move through the city. Berlin had more than 2 million mouths to feed. The land routes were levers. If you pushed them closed, the city's hunger would prove a point faster than any speech. Men who were laughing at chalked prices in the afternoon stopped laughing by dinner time and looked up whenever they heard a plane. The woman said, "We wait." Not to Ruth, but to herself. The city was a test now. Could you close off the roads and still fail to starve a population that finally had enough paper to buy what they needed? If only that stuff could actually arrive. A shopkeeper who had been chalking prices all afternoon listened to the radio. He didn't understand the languages being argued in the broadcasts, but he understood the dark laugh when he looked at the last line in his address book, where he had just scribbled, "Ask cousin in the West for flour, if possible." Or a miracle. The miracle wouldn't come in a sack over a road. It would come in aluminium, on wheels, measured in seconds instead of miles. A young pilot named Gail S. Halvorsen stood at Tempelhof with a bicycle leaned against something, listening to a boy explain a counting game the kids had invented. The planes came so often that they could time the landings with their breathing, instead of needing a watch. Mercedes, a girl near the fence, watched his hands whenever he spoke. When he asked how long they'd been there, the boy told him, every day, sometimes the whole day. Halvorsen gave away his last 2 sticks of gum to these kids. They tore the wrapper into equal strips, so everyone could smell that mint, even if they didn't actually get a piece. He promised, "I'll drop more next time." The boy asked how they'd know it was him, and Halvorsen grinned, wiggling his wings. Back with his crew, he announced, "We're going to make parachutes out of handkerchiefs." They started tying knots. The first bundle looked rough, but the second one improved. By the time he was taxiing his plane, he had about a dozen little parachute bundles. Over the radio to the tower, he said, "Nothing to declare, except sugar." The drops began. Paper parachutes floated down over rubble and grass, and the kids sprinted to catch them, then stopped and shared what they'd found. Letters started arriving at the base, addressed to the pilot who wiggled his wings. Mercedes wrote one in a steady hand, asking him to make the signal again. He wrote back. Years later, he would return to Berlin and meet her as a grown woman. But right now, their friendship was just the tilt of an airplane wing and the knowledge that someone on the other side of that fence remembered his face. At the airlift's peak, a plane landed roughly every minute. Some days it was even tighter, landing one after another in less than a minute at single fields. On one day, in April 1949, that they called the Easter Parade, the system moved nearly 13,000 tons in a single day on almost 1,400 flights. By the time the airlift tapered off, they were talking millions of tons, hundreds of thousands of flights, and more than 100 lives lost in crashes and mishaps. To land a plane every single minute without turning the runway into a demolition derby required precision. The airlift used slot times and stacked corridors, 3 one-way highways in the sky, one for coming in, one for going out, and one reserve. Planes were scheduled by the minute and separated by altitude layers. If a plane couldn't make its scheduled slot, It turned around. It didn't hover, because air doesn't allow planes to sit around loitering when thousands of flights are moving through the same airspace. Ground crews, loaders and fuel teams moved like they were part of a drill team. A well-run turnaround took just minutes. The Soviet calculation had been simple. Roads and rails are levers. Shut them down and the city starves. But the sky was actual infrastructure. The blockade's logic met competence and failed. Halvorsen's choice to start what people called little victuals without getting orders became official policy just because of the joy it created. Commanders understood that morale was cargo too. Soon other crews started tying their own parachutes. Berliners wrote more letters. A few of those candy drops crashed, funerals happened, and the city lined the route to the cemetery. Back at home, in buildings that had learned to be quiet, parents started sleeping through the engine noise. The sound flipped in people's minds. It wasn't danger anymore. It was dinner. Children who used to flinch whenever they heard a plane's drone now counted the candy shoots the way they count anything, until the game became almost boring, because safety finally became boring sometimes. On May 12, 1949, the blockade lifted. The airlift kept going for a few more months to build up reserves, then tapered off. A week later, a new state was proclaimed in the west. Months after that, another state in the east. The map got drawn. The bill for this miracle came due in borders and slogans and new flags. The children who kept those gum wrappers in their pockets remembered the sound of wings and the taste of sugar outside the fence. Relief no longer waited on roads. It landed. The transformation was complete. From a stairwell where the sound of boots meant you needed to brace yourself, to a fence where the sound of engines meant you could lift your face up to the sky. May 12, 1949. A single clap sounds the way one might at the end of a hymn, and people return to their work. The planes keep coming for a while after that, but slower now, the rhythm of someone walking after they've been running hard, trying not to let their heart give out. Eventually they thin out. The fences remain standing. Children still count the planes as they arrive, though they begin to lose interest when nothing's dropping anymore. A week after the airlift stops, a government announces itself in Bonn. 4 months later, another appears in East Berlin. 2 states now. One city learning to live with a new scene cut straight down its center. The language shifts. Occupation sectors become zones, then state borders, then our side and theirs. The map shows the cost of what just happened. In the stairwell, the latch still bears its scratches from all those years. But someone's planed the door smooth. It swings easier now. The windows hold new glass, clear, not that brown pane that tried so hard to mimic sunlight but couldn't. That echo from before lingers still, though tonight brings the sound of slippers on the stairs instead of boots. Somewhere upstairs, a child turns over in sleep and doesn't wake at the sound of an engine outside. In a drawer, tucked under a folded scarf, lies a candy wrapper. Saved the way people save hotel matchbooks or dried flowers, not because they need it, but because it proves a day happened. A real day, with real sweetness in it. Mercedes and Halvorsen write letters back and forth for years. When they finally meet as adults, it feels less like seeing a hero and more like seeing a neighbor you never got the chance to invite for coffee. He tells her, "You were the reason I banked the wings." She says back to him, "We didn't know you, but we knew your sound." That line sits between them like a bridge, standing even after the planes stop coming. The justice this city received comes in everyday form. A brick put back where it belongs and dust swept off the step. A teacher shows up with exercise books, and children don't trade them for bread anymore because there's actually bread now. A professor can stand and lecture about words, with students who understand the weight of syllables because they've measured the weight of coal. A writer like Ruth walks down a street and describes it without looking over her shoulder, without fear. The sound that ruled life for so long changed. It went from boots that meant, brace yourself, get ready for whatever comes, to engines that meant, dinner's coming. Ordinary Berliners went from expecting peace to bring relief, simple relief, to discovering that survival meant negotiating occupation, paperwork, and hunger. All of it. Until planes, not politicians, became their lifeline. The bill for that lifeline was a country divided. It's not a neat ending. It's a true one.